If you never made gnocchi from scratch before, you're in for a treat. Today we're making pumpkin gnocchi, and at the end we'll pair it with a classic brown butter sage sauce, which is perfect for the start of fall. Let's get right into it. We're starting off by prepping a kabocha pumpkin. Unlike the big orange jack-o'-lantern pumpkins, which are bland, watery, and super fibrous, kabocha is naturally sweeter, has less water, and is packed with flavor. First thing I'm doing is hacking off the stem so that the pumpkin lays flat when we place it upside down. Now I'm flipping it stem side down and inserting my knife right into the middle. Using some leverage, I'm cutting all the way down. These things can be really tough, so don't be afraid to put some pressure on it. Just be careful that your knife doesn't slip. I'm flipping the pumpkin upside down again, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Once both sides are cut, it should open right up. I always love seeing the contrast from the dark green skin to the bright orange inside. Now I'm going to scoop out all these seeds with a spoon. If you have some extra time, don't throw out the seeds. Remove the flesh from the seeds and you can roast them at 400 degrees for 20 to 30 minutes, hit them with some salt, and you've got yourself a quick snack. I'm placing these pumpkin halves face down in a sheet pan lined with some parchment paper. It's really important that we place them face down so that the cut side is touching the pan, letting it caramelize a little bit in the oven. Now we're going to roast our pumpkin in a 400 degrees oven for 45 minutes until they're nice and soft. Once the pumpkins are ready, you should be able to make an impression on them by pushing gently on the skin. Check out how nice and caramelized they got while cooking in the oven. Now we're going to let these cool for at least 10 minutes so our fingers don't melt off before moving on to the next step. Once the pumpkins have cooled off a little bit, we're going to scoop out all the flesh, leaving the skin behind. If it's giving you trouble while trying to scoop out the flesh, bake it for another 10 minutes. With all the pumpkins scooped out, we're going to give it a smash until it starts to look like mashed potatoes. It doesn't have to be super smooth either, just make sure to get those larger chunks. Now we're going to spread the mashed pumpkin back onto the sheet pan and put it into the oven for 10 more minutes. This dehydrates the mash slightly, creating fluffier gnocchi later on. It also prevents us from having to add too much flour to balance out the water content in the dough. I'm using gloves to spread this out because it's way easier than trying to do it with a spoon. The parchment also tends to lift up if you use a spatula or a spoon. Once out of the oven, the mash should have a thin skin that formed on top. That means it's ready to go. This recipe only calls for 1 cup of puree, but you can save it in your freezer and use it as you would with regular pumpkin puree. It makes things like pumpkin bread 10 times tastier. Now I'm taking 1 cup of this puree and I'm going to mix it with a half a cup of freshly grated Parmesan cheese. Don't use the pre-grated stuff as it just doesn't incorporate the same way. Then we're going to add 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. I love using nutmeg in savory fall dishes like this as it gives you that warm spice flavor without being too overpowering like cinnamon can be. Now we're going to give this all a mix with a fork and create a small well in the middle. Crack 1 egg into the middle and scramble it before incorporating it with the rest of the pumpkin mixture. Now comes the flour. I'm adding about a half a cup at a time so that the flour incorporates evenly. Just the smell of mixing the pumpkin and nutmeg together smells amazing. Once you get the full cup of flour into the dough, begin switching to your hands to finish kneading it. I'm folding and kneading the dough until it comes together and there's barely any visible flour left. The key here is not to overwork it. Stop as soon as you see the flour is incorporated. The dough should be slightly sticky and tacky but still moldable. If it's too wet, you can add a little bit more flour. If it's too dry, add a tiny bit of water. Once your dough is ready, cover it and let it rest for at least 10 minutes. This lets the flour hydrate and the dough firm up a bit, which makes it way easier to work with. At this point, the dough will be a bit sticky, so I'm going to flour my hands before removing it from the bowl. Now lightly flour your work surface and the top of the dough. This recipe makes enough for 4 portions, so we're going to divide the dough in 4. Working with 1 portion at a time, begin rolling it out on a lightly floured surface. Don't use too much flour or the dough won't have any friction to roll out properly. Just add enough so it doesn't stick. Roll it into a long rope about 1 inch in thickness. I like to use my thumb as a quick guide to see if it's thick enough. Now I'm going to use a bench scraper to cut the rope into 1/2 inch pieces. If you don't have a bench scraper, a knife works perfectly fine. Just make sure to cut it on a cutting board so you don't mess up your table. Then we're going to repeat this process with the remaining 3 portions. We're going to roll them out into 1 inch thick, and then we're going to cut 1/2 inch pieces. You can shape these into different shapes if you like. Some people like to roll them over a fork to get those little ridges, but I like to keep them as simple rectangles because that flat surface browns the best later on when we go to sear them. As you're finishing up shaping the gnocchi, place them onto a sheet pan lined with some parchment. If you want to store the extra for later on, pop the sheet pan into the freezer. This way they won't stick together as they chill. Once the extras are frozen, I like to transfer them into a Ziploc bag for easy storage. I'm taking 1 portion, about 16 to 18 gnocchi, and we're going to cook these in some salted boiling water. Make sure to salt your water really well, as the gnocchi needs to absorb some of that salt as they cook. After you drop them in, give them a stir so that they don't stick to the bottom. These cook extremely fast. It'll only take them about 2 minutes before they start floating to the top. That's when you know they're ready. Scoop them out with a slotted spoon and put them into a bowl with a little bit of olive oil so that they don't stick together when we make the sauce. Now for the sauce. I'm warming up another pan on medium-high heat, and we're going to add 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Cook this until the butter starts to brown. You'll hear it stop sizzling as much, and it'll start to smell really nutty. That's the milk solids toasting in the butter fat. Right as the butter turns a very light brown color, add in 7 leaves of sage. Be careful, the sage is going to pop and sizzle in that hot butter. Give that a toss until the sage becomes really fragrant. This takes about 10 seconds. Now we're going to add in the gnocchi. Give them a nice toss in that brown butter and sage, making sure every gnocchi is well coated. Also, don't forget to season your gnocchis with a little bit of salt as you sear them. Now we're going to let that cook and get a nice sear. I'll give them a toss every 30 seconds or so that they brown evenly. It should take about 5 to 6 minutes for your gnocchis to get perfectly brown and crispy on the outside. Once they look like this, we're going to give them a final toss and begin plating them up. I like to put some freshly grated Parmesan cheese over the top, as well as some toasted hazelnuts. Finish it off with a few of those fried sage leaves and your pumpkin gnocchi is ready to go. Alright, let's give this a try. Gotta get some of that sage and hazelnut for the full effect. Look how good that looks. Oh yeah, the brown butter not only gives these gnocchi that incredible crust, but it also adds its extra nutty flavor that pairs perfectly with the pumpkin and sage. The nutmeg also adds a touch of warm spice without overpowering the pumpkin flavor. This is restaurant quality stuff right here, and you can make it right at home with a pumpkin and some basic pantry ingredients. This is what cooking in season is all about, taking those seasonal ingredients and turning them into something special. Way better than any store-bought gnocchi, and the best part is, you can brag that you made it all by yourself. If you like today's recipe, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!